Hey everybody, this is Sheets and Happy New Year. The year didn't end so well for me on a health note as I did contract COVID on Wednesday. Um, uh, but I am feeling a little bit better, I'm feeling much better actually. It's now Saturday night and Saturday afternoon, and I feel as though symptoms have been actually I got them Wednesday morning, so about 5 days of symptoms seems to be in the cards, maybe one more, and then I'll be physically healthy. My family has somehow avoided it, which is even better. And yeah, so I'm going to try to test my voice out by just doing a kind of an overview on tonight's NBA slate. And I hope to be back with Bobby tomorrow to do the Sunday football preview. So again, what I'd like to do when I do these slate previews is not necessarily go game by game, but kind of take a top-down look at the overall slate. And I want to specifically utilize my sheets to do that. And I haven't done this in a while, haven't promoted this in a while, so I figured I would do that. For those of you that are watching this maybe for the first time, these are my I call them proprietary sheets that I use, which involve kind of a combination of industry projections plus my kind of design weighting of them based on my back testing, which I've done for accuracy. And what I do is I interlay on top of that what I like to call my sheets value score, where I combine good elements of raw points with elements of value. And we also have a really good, I think, a pretty good industry aggregate projected ownership input as well. Again, it's not just the average of the industry, but I've done a lot of work in assessing who's better than others, and I kind of weight them accordingly, and I come up with a good ownership projection. And then the right side of this column is the projected minutes, which Bobby advised me to put on here, and I didn't quite see why, but it is important because when you're basing a projection off of an assumption, that being minutes, if you can somehow give yourself an upside to those minutes or a downside to those minutes, which of these well projected players actually has upside from that projection and which might have downside from that projection. Like, for example, if you think that Serge Ibaka, I'm just as an example, has basically a floor of 23 minutes, then you could actually up his projection kind of, at least in your mind, to that, to even greater than this. So if you use my projections and get, even a certain amount of a certain player, you can go back to this and say, well, that's based on what minutes projection. Does he have upside or downside from those minutes? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this slate again from a top-down perspective, and you can rate these in any way you want. You can rate them by fantasy points. Some people like to use points per dollar to rate plays, and usually when you have anything over a 7, that's extremely tough to fade. When you have an over 7 points per dollar, if you have anything over a 6, it's kind of good, but you might have to worry about what type of player it is. Like if you have a guy who's going to project this well because he is, going to be on the floor for 35 minutes, but he rates to not have very much usage, then you might be cautious about playing that guy at really high ownership. Where if you have a 6 to 7x guy who is, is kind of active, then that's you have to make kind of a qualitative assessment. Anything over 7x is I just kind of accept is going to be a good play. Again, that's also a function of ownership, but when you're between 6 and 7x, you're really kind of in that gray area where it's a good value, but it's not a lock or anything like that, and you still have to qualitatively assess what type of play it might be. So now, when you look at the top of this is for a point per dollar. It rates Serge Ibaka as the top play. And so I would say that Serge Ibaka is going to be kind of someone you have to put in your lineups. I mean, he's well over 7x. And even if he's 40% owned, I don't think that's going to be enough for this type of point per dollar. Now, when we rate these guys by Sheets value score, you have, and it's important to know the differences here. So Nikola Jokic, he is rating not only as the top play, but by a lot. You know, when you have a gap of 50 points in value score from the top guy to the second guy, that really indicates that he should really be, you know, a decent priority for you. Okay. So I know that ownership is going to be, you know, going to be heavy here. I mean, I see about 60% ownership, but nonetheless, I mean, when I look at this and I see that, you know, you have a 50-point gap, you know, that's going to be because he's got clearly the top projection on the slate. It's not even close. So it's as weird as this is to say, 12-6 is kind of cheap for him. And as in a relative basis to the rest of the players on the slate, it's really, really strong. So you do probably want to make him a priority in your plays. So if you're kind of thinking about how to start your builds, I think it's a good way to start with Serge Ibaka and Nikola Jokic. Now, the good thing about Ibaka is that he's both power forward and center eligible. So he could fit really, really nicely as the power forward. You put Jokic as your center, and then the rest of your lineups can still, you know, can still play. Like you still have a utility that you can go to. So now, again, now when you have two kind of chalky players, now you have to really start thinking about, you know, what type of contest am I entering? Am I entering cash, or am I entering a GPP? Because once you start thinking about GPPs, which is what I usually do, you have to think about how to get different. You can't just play the top owned, you know, plays, even if they're the top plays in GPP lineups. You have to get leverage. You have to be different somewhere. So what I like to do is I like to look at the next kind of group here. So what I see is that this next group, you have White, Ibaka, and Harden rated by Sheet's value score here. And they're all kind of somewhat close. We already have accounted for Ibaka here. But what I'll notice is that Harden rates to have only about 15% ownership. So, you know, compared to Derek White, for example, you know, all else being equal, you kind of want to get Harden if you can, because he has that mix of good value score and ownership. Problem is, it's just going to be kind of hard, right? It's just going to be kind of hard to get in Harden and Jokic in the same lineup, even if you use Serge Ibaka. Because if you look at the remainder of the slate, like you sort by value, I mean, the other 3K options are really thin. You know, you have Cassius Stanley, who we might have to play if you want to do something like Harden and Jokic. You have guys like Vassell, he looks okay. And then there's Royce O'Neal, and then there's nobody that great below that, you know? So if you want to play both Harden and Jokic, it's extremely difficult to do. That's why Derek White is probably going to be a better play, just because you can just get him in that much easier. But he's 39% owned. So what else do you do? The next thing I do is I'll drop down to this next group. And just for the sake of discussion, I mean, you'll see that there's a really, really kind of smoothing of value scores here, you know? But let's just take these next 5 as an example, as your next tier, okay? And what I see when I look at this next tier is that you have a couple of guys who are really, really low owned. You have Vooch at 9,300, and then you have Durant at 11,400. Now, again, you see where we're headed here. You know, you want to know why these guys are going to be probably low owned, because look, they're no dummies. They know that, not they, I mean, the numbers know that most people are going to want to get to Jokic, and that if you're going to play these good, you know, these good plays like Vooch or Durant, it's just going to be so hard to get them in that's why not that many people are going to play them. So again, that's why these guys are going to be low owned. It's not so easy to say, oh, he's low owned, I'm going to play him. You know, you got to be able to put him in your lineups. Otherwise, you know, what you end up doing is playing just a bunch of random 3K guys, and it's probably not the slate to get that kind of thing done. Okay. So then you have the next group here is you have Gafford. He's a little higher owned, but at least he's more palatable. The only from an ownership perspective, excuse me, from a salary perspective. But the problem is here is that we have position eligibility issues because again, this is another center. So what you're going to then have to do if you play Jokic and and Gafford is that's going to take up your utility spot. But that's fine. I mean, you do have to take it up from somewhere. So again, Harden looks like a good play. Vooch looks like a good play, because they're well rated and and Durant looks like a good play, even though they're well rated because they're well rated and their ownership is low. But you're just not going to be able to get them in with Jokic. Beal is probably a very bad play because he's no better from a value score than all these other guys, and he's tough to get in, and his ownership you don't get a break on. So he would probably be the weakest of all of those. And then you start to get down into this range here of value. And again, what you're looking for in a perfect world are guys with good value scores, they're low owned that you could kind of get in. And this next one here is Barton. Okay, so Barton is pretty highly rated. His ownership is not that bad. I mean, 15%, that's not terrible. And you can get him in. Now, here's where we kind of run into kind of a debate is it good, bad, or indifferent whether you play Jokic and Barton in the same lineup? I don't think it's a big deal either way. I think that, number one, they correlate decently in that you could imagine, Jokic getting some assists to Barton. They could correlate decently in case the game goes to overtime. The two of them are both going to get those extra minutes. But you could argue that for every shot that Jokic takes, right, it's one that Barton is not able to take. And I guess that's arguable too. But I think all that kind of evens out. And I do think Barton's a reasonable play here. Let's look at some of these other kind of lower owned guys. Again, you have DeRozan, who's just kind of tough to get in. Then you get to these other guys. Now we're getting somewhere. You have Marcus Morris and Podol. Their ownership is relatively tame. But Podol, the problem is you have position eligibility issues. So here, once again, you have Podol, who's a significantly worse play than Gafford, and he's taken up that precious, center spot. So in this range, I think that Marcus Morris is probably going to be the superior play because you could use him in that small forward spot. You don't want to use him power forward, right? Because we're already got Ibaka going there. Now, again, this is all presuming you're building kind of one lineup. I mean, if you're building multiple lineups, you can kind of screw around a little bit. And then you go down a little bit, and now you get another kind of value piece. You have Campazzo. Now, again, this is another Denver guy. So, again, you can argue whether this is good, bad, or indifferent, but he's a guy that fits within this kind of range of value. His ownership might not be, is a little bit, healthier than I would like, but he makes the rest of your lineup work, which one of the reasons why his ownership is that way. Again, this is no secret. So he looks like a pretty strong play. What you want to look for when you go down the list here, when you're rated by Sheets value score, are guys that you can get a break on with ownership, and you're just not getting too much of it today. Like Devin Vassell at 23% all the way down here is not really what you necessarily want to do, but he could make the rest of your lineups work. What I prefer, boy, this is another Denver guy. Boy, oh boy. If you want to do this, you can play Aaron Gordon. He's another low-owned Denver guy that, again, you're starting to get into playing too many guys in the same team. If you play Gordon and Jokic and Barton, because they are, only one ball can be shot each time down court. But God forbid that game goes to overtime, you get all three of them in, you're definitely going to be a happy camper. Next thing I want to do is I want to rate these guys, all this stuff by points per dollar, and see if I can't glean anything a little bit different. Okay. So we already talked about Ibaka. Now the next guy on our list here, rated by sheer points per dollar, is going to be Chet Diallo. Now it's no surprise that he's from the center position because mostly centers are undervalued in general. So when you get kind of a cheap center, it's going to play minutes. Even though this is only 20 minutes, you're going to get probably a good projection from him. So here you have him at 3,200, second best point per dollar play on the slate, and only 13% owned. You know, that ownership can't be understated. You know, it's really, really important. So you could make the argument that Diallo might, at that center spot, be a better play than, say, Daniel Gafford. You know, even though Daniel Gafford has the higher, you know, Sheets value score, which means he's going to be probably scoring fantasy points. You know, Check Diallo is going to be lower owned, so, and probably make the rest of your lineup work maybe a little better. So you could probably, you know, you could take a shot at that. Then you have this Cassius Stanley shooting guard position, only 3K. You got to be careful, guys, like this, these 3K flat shooting guards. You know, unless you think they're really going to shoot the ball, you can't just, you know, just presume that 18 fantasy points is something you want to play. Because here's another secret. You know, when you're playing guys at 3K, you don't only want 18 fantasy points. So you really want 30 to make it work, at least 20, 25. Getting 18 fantasy points out of a guy like this is just not going to fly. So got a little homework to see if this is a guy that actually is an active type of player. And I'll do that a little bit later, maybe later today. These other guys we already talked about, Campazzo, pretty good play, Vassell, pretty good play. Royce O'Neal, so he could be, you know, for example, let's say that Vassell's 25% owned, and you have a guy like Royce O'Neal who is 15% owned. Maybe O'Neal is a decent pivot in GPPs off of Vassell. You know, Vassell's going to be, you know, have almost double the ownership. And we go down the list. I mean, these are all guys I talked about already. Luke Garza, not the best, because again, we've already talked about 3 or 4 really strong plays to center position. You're just giving up too much opportunity cost, I think, by playing somebody like Luke Garza. He is only going to be 10, 11% owned, but even still. Rudy Gay is, I think, on a back-to-back tonight. So I don't even know if he plays, but if he does, you know, you have to consider it. But he's an older guy. I don't know if he has a lot of upside from these 21 minutes. I'd probably avoid him. And I guess that's pretty much about it with respect to DraftKings. Okay. You know what I want to do, just for fun? I want to run a build with my projections as they are now, just to see, you know, what type of exposure we get. Now, again, you know, this is not the lineups I'm going to use and all that, you know, all those disclaimers. This is not, you know, probably even the projections I'm going to use, because so many things kind of happen between now and lock. But let me just see what it would be. So what I'm doing is I'm going to upload, I'm using SaberSim for this. You can use Roto Grinders, Fantasy Crunch, whatever. SaberSim gets the nod for this one. And you can download these from the website, but, you know, I kind of save my projections here. And if I upload all this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a build with just, well, I'm going to give it a little bit of ownership fade, a little bit of diversity, you know, not that much correlation. And let's see, let's build 150 lineups just to see what type of, you know, what type of exposure we get given my projections. I'm expecting to see close to 100% Jokic. I'm expecting to see close to 100% Ibaka. I wonder what else is going to show up, given what I just said. I wonder if any of the lower owned guys that we talked about are going to get in here, or is it just going to be kind of like the chalkier plays? All right, let's see what we got. So we actually do have 100% Derek Jokic, like I mentioned. We have, you know, close to 100% Ibaka, we have 95%. But we do have, you know, they're wanting to get almost 100% of Derek White, which is pretty interesting. Yeah, and these other guys are guys that I mentioned during the course of the discussion. So as I mentioned, like Jokic is going to be pretty highly owned because it is, you know, pretty easy to get to him in the first place, with that other value, like that being what's his name, Campazzo and Serge Ibaka specifically. All right, so let me go over to FanDuel and see if there's any real difference on the slate given, given all of this. Let's again rate these by sheets value score first. And yeah, I will see that Jokic still rates to be extremely strong, kind of difficult to fade. Then you see Bradley Beal is priced a little better over here, so he kind of moves up the ranks. That's one thing to note. Another thing to note, DeRozan becomes a little more palatable. Christian Wood becomes a little more palatable. So these are the guys that you probably want to add on FanDuel that maybe you wouldn't necessarily use on DraftKings. So yeah, that's about all I have for you guys for today. Hopefully that got you at least some insight into some process, at least, of how I go about selecting guys and how I go about running builds and things like that. And as we get closer to 6 tonight, I will update projections based on whatever injury news I have at my disposal. And with any luck, maybe we'll go live again tonight and just go over some late changes and late stuff that we talk about. That's about it. Happy New Year, guys, and good luck tonight.